G'day everyone, I am the man called Kemosabe, the man they call Lucille, Lucy to my friends, the man with the plan from the land down under, the man too dangerous for YouTube, the man they tried to censor, but couldn't. And this is my review of Detective Dead Crimson Moon, written by Cridious with art by Luper and Carlos Eduardo. This review will strictly be focusing on the comic itself, not any of the controversy that surrounds it. My reviewing this comic isn't me supporting the actions of any creator, it's me talking about a long-awaited book set in a time and a genre close to my heart. As usual, take a look at the cover, then talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of this comic book. This cover is amazing. It's a poster-worthy work of art that looks like movie advertising, with a central, larger-than-life figure surrounded by headshots of the supporting cast. It is highly detailed and done justice on a large screen. A regular comic page wouldn't suffice for this image. It begs for an oversized format, something to show off all the intricate line work. The purple, pink and grey colour scheme perfectly suits the dusk crimson moon motif of the book. The villains to the side promise something more than the standard hard-boiled PI or detective. The title character is standing on a gargoyle, something usually found far above the city, usually a spot frequented by Batman, Daredevil and Spider-Man among others, giving us visual clues that the detective might be something more than human. If not, why else would he be standing on sculptural masonry 100 stories above the city? This cover would have me tripping over myself to pick it up off the shelf and take a look inside, to see if the interior delivers on the promises the cover makes. The book starts with an amazing opening shot of the unnamed city, with distinct Gotham vibes, the red-pink sky reminiscent of Tim's animated Batman series. A radio broadcast mentions the scientific phenomenon is a rare crimson moon. Israel, hinted at being a fireman, is abducted on his way home from a date with his best girl, beaten and burned alive for race mixing. The titular detective and his partner, Guy, move in on a gang meetup. The detective mentions the crimson moon feels all wrong, and he takes extra precautions. The detective admits he'd prefer to simply kill all the criminals, but he knows that that's wrong, and submits to the law, letting it decide who is guilty rather than making that judgment himself. Two major gangs, the Bloodline and the Emerald Brotherhood, meet, with their leaders trading signet rings, burning the symbol of each other's organisation into their hands, marking the union of their two fraternities. Just then the detective and the police arrive, leading to an incredible 11-page firefight. This is what I imagine the Matrix or John Wick would look like in comic book form. The page is overrun with muzzle flash and bullet impacts. The artist does a great job of showing motion and movement in the arcs of fire and the body weight of the characters. Xavier, the leader of the Bloodline, escapes and blames the detective, who we learn is called Joel, for the destruction of his organisation. Swearing vengeance, he forces his way into a house with a woman and child while armed. While it's not explicitly said here, anyone who saw the promo art for this project will realise that the woman and child are Joel's wife and child, and this is where the 27-page preview of Detective Dead ends. Simply put, this is a great-looking professional-level book. The art, the action, the colours are top-notch and stand shoulder to shoulder with nearly anything being published today. From Gotham-like cities to Sleepy Hollow-esque forests, this art sets the tone the book promised. This feels like it could exist alongside the Shadow's Chicago of the 30s and 40s, or the Golden Age Gotham City. The weapons, costumes and vehicles are all era appropriate, evoking the time to the readers even though we never actually lived it ourselves. The colouring is consistently good. The whole book has a pink and purple hue to it, the light of the aforementioned crimson moon. It casts a sinister and lethal tone across the whole story, and seems very appropriate to preside over a gunfight action sequence that goes on for more than 10 pages. The action sequence is fluid and flows well from panel to panel, page to page, with only a few exceptions. The frenetic pace of this firefight means you burn through the book quickly, but there is plenty of detail to go back and admire after the fact. The battle unfolds like a scene out of a movie, and you can almost hear the bullets whining past characters as they fight for their lives. The pages have a huge amount of panel variety, meaning there's always something new to look at, and the action has an overwhelming, frantic pace. It feels like the firefight might only have taken a minute or two to play out, but all these events happen simultaneously. I think this might be the best gunplay I've ever seen in a comic book. This is John Woo in The Matrix running a 30s gangster, cops and robbers simulation. It's entertaining and exciting, and more comics could use this kind of energy. Well, the art is good. It's really good. There's a bit of same face going on. Someone like Ibai Canales has an exaggerated, rule-breaking style. It allows everyone to look markedly different and avoids character mix-up. Walking Dead often had the same problem as this book. I'd be rereading pages to see who was who. When the zombie apocalypse arrives and every bloke stops shaving and cutting their hair, it's hard to tell one character from another. Similarly, it might be the zoot suits and pork pie hats and the ties and fedoras, but especially in the battle scenes, you have to look twice, sometimes 3 times, amidst the chaos to tell who is who. The action centres on Joel, but there are some sequences where you aren't sure if the central character is actually him. The author adds some era-appropriate slang here and there, but it's not very natural. Some of it works and some of it falls a little flat. Even so, it's better in than not. While it's a bit clumsy, it does its job. It reminds you where and when the story is set. There's a few instances where it looks like text has been used to let us storefronts and signs. I don't think that ever works. It's always better being drawn in by hand. When it's added after the fact, it always looks out of place, and to me at least, reminds me I'm sitting in my house reading a comic book. It steals from me the sensation that I'm witnessing actual events unfold in front of me, which is where this book took me initially. Another thing that stuck out to me was the fact that the titular character wasn't named until more than halfway through the book, and it was at a place in the story where you could easily miss it. I know the SJW Marvel trend of having pithy little blurbs for each character is widely and rightfully derided, but some form of introduction should be made, even if it's just dialogue where the characters address each other by name. There's a spelling mistake on page 2. That's how hard up I am looking for bad elements in this book. I'm mentioning the omission of a single letter. Is this 27-page preview the whole first issue? If it is, it's kind of short, and while the gun battle is excellent, it chews up more than a third of the book. If the remaining 2/3 was used for fleshing out characters, particularly Joel, or setting the scene more, creating interactions that enhance the conventions of the genre to immerse the reader more, that wouldn't necessarily be a problem. I'd argue too many comics go light on the action these days. Long drawn-out fights have been replaced with long drawn-out conversations, meals, and other social interactions. I'm glad the long fight is in this book, but it exists at the cost of other much-needed elements. One way this could have been combated is by reworking something I haven't mentioned until now: the cameos. This book has several older Comicscape personalities starring in cameos. Early on in the story we see Israel reading a paper with an unnamed red rooster on the front page. It's just one panel and it helps set the tone that vigilantes and heroes exist in this world. Despite the drama and financial issues plaguing the Red Rooster / Allegiance Arts team, it made me smile to see Rooster in this book. A worse offender is the inclusion of Cecil and Nurkish. I'll admit I'm a fan of both of these guys and their styles of comedy. I think Nurkish is legitimately an unsung comedy genius in the whole pop culture / anti-SJW scene. Cecil has managed to take a shout out from Zack and turn it into a several $100,000 crowd-funded comic. These guys had a falling out and aren't even speaking to each other right now, but here they're portrayed as a team. The problem with this is like when the Avengers used to meet with Nixon or Reagan to get their marching orders. It dates the work, it draws the reader out of the narrative, and they take up space that could be better used elsewhere. The humour at their arrival is tempered by them overstaying their welcome. They're written like two argumentative old men, lacking the individual personality and unique humour each one exhibits on their own. There are a lot of these kind of cameos in early Comicscape books, and because of the drama and ego clashes the movement has been rife with, almost all of them are outdated, irrelevant, or strangely ironic. This space could have been used so much better, introducing real characters that would have been part of the story later on, or by simply expanding the characters that have already been introduced. If this is the whole book, it ends on a sufficient cliffhanger, but a lot is left hanging and you're not sure if it matters. From the cover we could tell that the man Israel, the guy who was set on fire, will become a hero or villain ostensibly with powers of his own. A check-in with him would have been good to remind the audience that he's a pivotal part of the story. Of course, if this is only the first half or third of the book, many of these points are moot. The foreshadowing is well played. The Crimson Moon is in every scene possible, to never let you forget it's playing a part in the upcoming events. You could just as easily call it Chekhov's moon, so frequently do we see it. These setups are important in a story, especially in these days of subverted expectations gone wrong. When we expect something and it is delivered, our brain rewards us with a little feel-good moment. Meeting expectations is important to building a satisfied customer base. If you subvert expectations too often, it becomes your signature, and therefore becomes predictable. The next big twist in an M. Night Shyamalan film should be that there is no twist. I was surprised Cridious had black-on-black violence in his opening scene. Israel is set alight and nearly killed for the crime of dating a white woman, but he's attacked by his own people. I did a double take because when a story is set so far in the past and you see an unassuming black man walking down the street, you just know the KKK is going to roll up and start something. When it was his own people attacking him, I was impressed Cridious is brave enough to write the scene like this. I hope this element of Israel's trials is critical to his future character development. I think most people are tired of woke books and stories, tired of the virtue signalling and self-loathing white creators. I feel like Cridious is here to tell a good story, not score woke points or get on his soapbox. Now the story itself is pretty standard. We don't get a whole lot of Joel's character other than tough cop man early on. The insight into his willingness to kill is probably the most memorable thing about him. I've noticed in my own writing this phenomena of making side characters more memorable than protagonists. It happens in video games too. Whenever I play the type of game where you build a team, I make one guy a hand-to-hand specialist, another one a sniper, another one a healer. Usually they end up being more efficient than the leader, who I usually try to trick out as jack of all trades, which means he's not really great at anything. Similarly, I often find side characters and support characters to be more memorable than most protagonists because they are allowed to be one note, more focused and flawed, and therefore more committed to whatever their gimmick is. You don't mind giving them real chips on their shoulders and some of the less pleasant predilections while trying to make the MC as well-rounded, capable and likeable as possible. And in doing so, the side characters often steal the show. There is a reason Vegeta and Piccolo are still so popular despite being borderline redundant for years on end. The book ends with Xavier forcing his way into Joel's house, we assume to kill his family. The death of loved ones is so often motivation for the greatest of heroes. Batman, Daredevil and Spider-Man are all motivated by the death of parents or parent figures. Superman bears the burden of a whole species lost. I find in media this kind of motivation has been used so much, so often, that it's hard to care a lot. It functions, mechanically, as a sufficient motivator for characters' actions, sure, but I don't often get that sense of fear or anger that allows me to empathise with the character's loss. During the first season of Netflix's Punisher show, I was waiting impatiently for Frank's bedroom flashbacks to hurry up and be finished so I could see him shoot more bad guys in the face. I found Microchip's family turmoil more moving than Frank's. It could be because I've seen Frank's pain for decades in dozens of books, handled much better. Or it could be that I've seen the same scenario in most Steven Seagal movies. I've watched dozens of action movies that cram scenes of family time into the first few minutes to try and sell the connection the man has for his family, so you believe his rage when they are inevitably killed. There is a kind of risk-reward model here. The longer you spend building up the scenes of connection, the greater your empathy with the MC's anguish will be, but that time could be used to showcase more action. However, the less time you spend on these connection-building scenes, the less likely you are to empathise with the MC's pain and loss, but the more action and cool stuff you can fit in the film. There are exceptions. Keanu spends a tiny amount of time grieving for his wife, but his anguish is sold particularly well in John Wick. Conversely, both Tombstone and Taken spend a significant amount of time detailing the characters, their connections and feelings, which means when their loved ones are put in danger, your heart is thundering along with the MC's. And sure, maybe we don't have to care. Maybe we just accept it as part of the narrative so the good guy can do bad things to bad people. But motivation is a powerful tool in the author's toolbox. And people remember Brian Mills' singular goal and focus. His character wouldn't have been as powerful had we not had uncomfortable scenes where he was framed as a doddering old man who is in fear of losing his daughter. The contrast then from that irrelevant, paranoid old man to the raw, visceral angel of vengeance is the payoff for our faith in the story. In the comic book medium, space is a premium. You wouldn't know it to look at Marvel these days. Without the benefit of decades of lore and history to establish a character, we have a few scant pages to introduce and establish a character, and hope they come out likeable in time for the story to really kick in. We haven't seen Joel's reaction to his family's death, if indeed the deaths are a foregone conclusion. Cridious might sell it as well as Keanu did, but even if he can do that, even if he is that talented of a writer, I hope he does it with a minimum of flashbacks. I've sidestepped the drama that surrounds Cridious. That's intentional. I don't want a drama channel. I want to review indie books, good and bad, hopefully more of the former than the latter, and talk about what works and what doesn't. If you can separate the art from the artist, if you can forgive, or if you never knew in the first place, give Detective Dead a look. It's definitely one of the better books I've seen come out of crowdfunding. And if you can't do any of those things, check it out anyway, and see if maybe you can't just enjoy the good art and cinematic action. See if you can't just enjoy a good comic, regardless of where or who it's from.